There was a time in the 80s when excessive living was all the rage. The more you could flaunt how much money you made and be all show-offy about it meant you were cool or important or whatever. But the 80s were definitely the decade of greed. Now, being frugal is considered smart. Dorky penny pinchers like this are quite the catch, right, ladies? Being cheap means you're fiscally responsible, and more money in the bank is more desirable than having a fancy car and an expensive watch. And working less is now the jam. If you can find a way to get by without killing yourself to death, then you've got it made, especially if you work from home. In this video, we'll discuss the cheapest places you can live in our nation in 2020, the states where you don't have to work all those extra hours just to stay afloat, and as we'll see in most of the cheapo depot regions of America, you can actually save money and spend more time with your family and sometimes be the only provider. This would be really helpful for all the people leaving the chaos of our large inner cities right now. Let's begin. One cheap place you can move to or currently take advantage of the cost savings in is the state of Indiana. Indiana? Hey, I didn't say it was going to be fun, did I? I said cheap. And since I lived there for 5 years, I can attest the cost of living is super low and the people there are cheap on top of it, especially the older people who drive down to Tractor Supply for all the free popcorn. But what does the data say in terms of Indiana's cost of living? Well, the living wage here is $52,000, which means if you make this amount as a household, you can live comfortable enough to not struggle. Housing costs, for instance, are $800 a month on average. That's probably the same amount most of you people in California pay for your combined car payments. Now, the living wage here is $52,000, and the average family here earns exactly $55,746. So that means you'd have about $3,746 per each family each year to save. That's enough to buy a lot of stuff, like 396 tenderloin dinners. That's every night of the year. People in Indiana love their pork tenderloin dinners. Being able to pay all their bills plus eat out every night at their local Greasy Spoon would be hog heaven for Indiana people. Down in South Carolina, it's cheap living, while in Indiana, there's some expensive pockets near Indianapolis. In South Carolina, it's all glitz and glamour along the coast. The average Charleston home is about $336,000, which seems really low and includes areas way out in the sticks. But look at Florence, a ghetto hood. It's $147,000 for a house there. However, as a whole, housing costs in South Carolina average about $10,000 a year, or just about $833 a month for a mortgage or for rent. And that's actually the highest of any other state on this list, but that's still super cheap. Anyways, as a whole, South Carolina folks only need about $52,038 to live comfortably each year. Childcare, for example, is only about $4,600 a year here, or $383 a month per kid. Compare that to Massachusetts, where childcare costs are about $17,000 a year. Holy crap, can you imagine spending $1,400 a month on a babysitter per kid? Now, the average income for a family in South Carolina is $52,306, and the cost of living is $52,038, meaning South Carolina peeps have a whole $268 each year to splurge on something like boiled peanuts. Despite being soggy and tasting like wet paper bags, people here love them, and they can afford about 63 pounds of them a year from a place like Timbo's, a roadside stand in South Carolina. Ohio people in the house. Now, we just did a video about the poorest cities in America, and 4 Ohio cities were towards the top. So cheap and poor go hand in hand in this instance. The average Ohio family needs about $52,013 to experience the awesome Ohio life. Now, of course, average housing costs of $787 means you'll likely live in a beat-up city like Dayton, Cleveland, Toledo, or Cincinnati, or way out in the boonies. But hey, that's Ohio. To compare the cost of living in Ohio to our most expensive place to put a roof over your head, we'll look at Hawaii. Here, the average cost is $1,800 a month for rent or mortgage. But as you can see, there's a huge difference in just about everything, so I guess you get what you pay for. Since the average Ohio family makes about $56,000 and the cost of living is less than that, people in Ohio can spend an extra $4,098 on 17 brand new cornhole boards. That's actually not very many, but if you know anything about Ohio, you cannot show up to a barbecue with a basic cornhole board. You would not be cool, pal. For the last time, we'll remain in this general area of the nation. This is Kentucky, where, as you can imagine, people are good at saving money. That's because people don't have a lot of money, but you don't need a lot of money to live a decent life in Kentucky. A Kentuckian can get by on a household budget of under $52,000. Housing costs are the third lowest in the country for about $739 a month. A full-time job is about 2,080 hours a year if you work 40 hours a week, which means that the whole house in Kentucky needs to average about $18.50 an hour to get by. Which means in Kentucky, mom and dad can basically work minimum wage jobs full-time and have extra money left over at the end of the month. But they are not doing that. The average Kentucky family earns under the living wage amount people need to get by on. That's the first state where we've seen that. So there is no extra money for the average family here, which means despite it being so cheap and despite the fact that you don't have to work hard to live above poverty, many people in Kentucky are still doing just that. We're in the deep south now, the poorest part of our nation. Here in Alabama, it's dirt cheap to live, which is a good thing because a lot of people are poor. For a combined $50,585, a family of four can pay all their bills and still have a little bit left over. But like in Kentucky, the average family earns below that by about $724 a year or $60 a month. That's not that bad, but it's certainly paycheck to paycheck for many Alabamans who don't have much left over at the end of the month. Now, Alabama does have higher than average taxes and higher than average medical costs. If it wasn't for those two facts, people in Alabama would have a little bit more breathing room. Call your representatives, Alabama people, come on. Now, a long time ago, I bet most people would say they would never live in South Dakota. But look who's coming up smelling like roses now. A cheap, safe place to live without drama is where we're all thinking of going, especially in a state run by a super hot and fiscally responsible governor like this. Should we all be so lucky? In South Dakota, it only takes about $4,200 a month to easily get by on. Housing and food combined is about $1,300 a month. No income taxes helps. Not like in New York, where people pay an average $1,000 a month in taxes alone. But check this out. The extra money left over for the average family in South Dakota is massive, like $6,108 a year massive. That extra money could go a long way. For instance, it could be used to purchase a ton of chislic. What, you don't know what chislic is? It's a South Dakota delicacy made of deep fried or squares of meat, likely elk, mutton, cow, or deer. For $6,108, you could go to Mad Mary's Steakhouse, which has the state's best chislic, supposedly, and buy 610 chislicks each year. That's chislic for mom and dad every night. Chislic party, woo woo. While the cost of living in Nashville is going through the roof, the rest of the state of Tennessee is chilling financially. For $4 less each year than in South Dakota, a family can kick back and take life in without much care in the world. Taxes are super low and food costs are too. A mortgage will set you back about $810 a month on average. There's people in Florida like, I wish my mortgage was $810. Tennesseans have an extra $2,200 a year left over, even if they work low-paying jobs. Being religious folk, many Tennessee people would possibly donate some of that to their church, or they could purchase 222 of these handsome Bibles that's easy to read and has titles of Jesus, and it's made of imitation leather. And this Bible has errors in it, and it's made in China. I don't think there's a lot of people in Tennessee who want a Chinese Bible. Don't buy this Bible, Tennessee. In fact, don't buy this Bible, anyone. Of course, West Virginia's on here. It's dirt cheap to live in this state because, well, nobody wants to live here. Okay, that's just mean West Virginia, but it's cheap here for a reason. Coal jobs pay really well, as do other energy sector employers, so dad can clearly bust his blue-collar butt every week, and mama can stay home and tend to the chickens. No, that's mean and stereotypical. Of course, mama's not busy with chickens. She's scratching off all her lottery tickets. Despite the cheap cost of living, you can see on this chart, the average family here earns far less than what it takes to live here. That's likely because there just aren't too many places here for work, or maybe it's because people aren't trying. Back to the South we go, and in the South we will remain. Here in Arkansas, a family of four can get by on under $50K a year, and for just over $700 a month can pay mortgage or rent. On the not so good news side though, Arkansas employers pay the second lowest salaries in the nation. Families in Arkansas earn about $2,500 less each year than it takes to survive on. But why is that? I mean, even working at Walmart, which pays $14.26 an hour, that earns somebody about $29,660 a year in salary. If mom and dad both worked at Walmart full time, an Arkansas family could save up and within 10 years buy a double-wide trailer with cash. Our cheapest place to live in America is Mississippi, and that's likely not a surprise to anyone watching this video. For $48,527 a year, you can live a decent life here, and anything more than $60,000 and you'll be daddy warbucks. Childcare, healthcare, food, gas, groceries, it's all cheap. Houses here average about $127,000, which is stupid low. But people here are still falling behind in Mississippi too. Families earn about $4,000 less each year than they need to remain comfortable, even on such a cheap budget. 1 in 5 families remains in poverty, which is double the national average, so clearly something is wrong. If you're working too hard and watching your savings and retirement accounts just tick upwards, maybe it's time to leave whatever expensive place you live in and head for the hills. In places we talked about, you can work even the most basic jobs and still have a decent life. So you should think about downsizing. If you live in one of these places, you should be doing okay if you work a full-time job. If you're struggling and you live in a state we discussed, then it shouldn't be too hard for you to turn things around. I'm just saying. The end.